Yes and no.
Right?
All right, let's start with the head.
Well, I know we're supposed to do this like, absolutely. No, he's not. He's a pain in the ass, right? But he can really play football. He's got 15 touchdown receptions, a team record, and he didn't play their most important game of the year. On the other hand, he didn't play their most important game of the year because they couldn't have him around the team because he wouldn't show up at practice because he got into a he said, she said, a kerfuffle with his Hall of Fame quarterback. Like, yes and no. Is he worth it? Yes. Is he worth, betting the farm and having $20 million in dead cap money just to trade him and get him out of the locker room? I don't think so. I feel like his contract's kind of a poison pill. They empowered a guy who's super, super talented, but part of the talent is this immense amount of ego, which is ruining so many of the great things he's accomplished on that field.
I'm going to go with no, just a pure no. And this is tough for me because as a receiver, I love what he does. I love what he provides on the football field. But when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers and who they are and what they've always been able to do, they've always drafted that particular position very well. Santonio Holmes, Super Bowl MVP, Emmanuel Sanders, Mike Wallace, all these guys. Juju Smith-Schuster, who have moved on because there was a next guy up. And when I see Juju Smith-Schuster and what he provides for this offense and this team, I don't think we have the option, or we do have the option, but I don't think that it's necessary for us to hold on to an Antonio Brown. When you can allow this young guy to flourish, and yes, is production on the field important? Yes. But our culture is more important. Can we win with you the way that you are? No.
Culture will beat X's and O's any day of the week, and your culture is bad. Now, I put a lot of that on Mike Tomlin, who has a mantra there within the locker room that says, I'm going to put up with it until I don't need you anymore, until I can replace you. That's the mantra. I'll put up with it until I can replace you. Well, you look at a guy like Antonio Brown, man, that guy is so talented. Like, how do you replace that amount of talent? I will tell you this. If you replace some of it and you became more balanced and less selfish, you probably end up being in the playoffs right now. The one game where they really relied on a running game was late in the season against New England. Their personal bugaboo, the team that they can never get over the top, beat them 17-10 with a third-string running back that had about 150 yards rushing. So I would tell you this, until Mike Tomlin would admit that I haven't managed this very well, and from this day forward, it's not going to be run by the players, I won't put up with this garbage, and I'll take away recess if you act like this. Until that happens, I don't think a whole lot's going to change there. But I happen to be with you. When we play football, it's the ultimate team game. He's the ultimate in selfishness. Football is about caring more about the guys you play with than you care about yourself. And it's a completely dependent game. Like, I depend on everybody else. As an offensive lineman, I'm depending on the other guys on that offensive line to help me do my job. I can't be great unless we're great. And the ultimate kind of dependent position is wide receiver. 10 guys have to do their job for you to even sniff the football. And how you don't understand that, I don't get that part of it.
I'm going to have to agree with you. I think it's over for Antonio Brown in Pittsburgh. Guys, think about this. Last year, before their playoff game against Jacksonville, do you guys remember Le'Veon Bell just strolled in at the tail end of the walkthrough, the day before the playoff game?
Right.
That was that culture you talked about. Le'Veon Bell just showed up. Hey, what's up, guys? They lose to Jacksonville, okay? This has been enabled by Mike Tomlin for the better part of 5 years now, right? Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, they run the show. You remember that Facebook Live he did in the locker room? Like, that's the culture, and it is a problem. They moved on from Le'Veon Bell. They're going to move on from Antonio Brown, and they're not going to lose that much. When you mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster, he's a legit #1 receiver in this league. And I will wrap up with this. Doug, look at the Patriots, okay? They have been the team in the way of Mike Tomlin and Ben Roethlisberger for the better part of a decade.
True.
Would Bill Belichick put up with this nonsense from Le'Veon Bell? And then would he put up with it from Antonio Brown? I think Mike Tomlin knows, hey, man, we missed the playoffs. Maybe a little unlucky. I got one more year here to fix this. Antonio Brown, sayonara. I think they got to move on from him.
If you give me the character beats talent, especially when talent has no character, I agree with you. We're all in agreement.
Yeah.
This is the stuff of losing teams. Now we're getting to the root of, hey, what's the matter with the Steelers? Why do they play down-level competition? Now we're getting to the root of some of the problems. Okay, but there's the reality of the sport and the reality of the contract that he has. $20 million in dead cap money if they trade him before June 1st. What's that mean? That means you can't trade him for a draft pick. Okay, that screws you. And remember, as much as you go like, hey, look, the Bills, they had all this dead cap money. Yeah, because the Bills are in they don't have a Hall of Fame quarterback who's in the last couple of years of his career. You're the Pittsburgh Steelers. You got 1, 2, maybe 3 more years of Ben Roethlisberger left. You got to find a way to make it work in the immediate future. And I just don't know if the realities of his contract, the realities of the sport say you can part ways with him. Like, how good were they week 16 with Juju Smith-Schuster as the number 1 guy? Not nearly as good as
week 15, they were great. I mean, they beat the Patriots. So, like, this is a Pittsburgh team that can win without Antonio Brown. Listen.
They also lost to the Denver Broncos. They also lost to the Oakland Raiders. Granted, Ben Roethlisberger.
They do play down to the competition.
Okay, so, and look, if they had Le'Veon Bell, who wanted too much money, they're in the playoffs right now. So we're all together in saying, like, look, this is the type of stuff that you can't have on your franchise if you really want to win. I just don't know how they get out of it. And I think we should also point out he's great. He's great at what he does on the football field.
Mark, is there too much entitlement within this locker room? When I look at this locker room, I see a Le'Veon Bell who obviously he is produced on the field, but he feels entitled. Ben Roethlisberger, he's won early. He's caused problems with he and the head coach, feels entitled. Antonio Brown, obviously what he's done, there's a sense of entitlement that looms over this organization. And this locker room, is that the problem?
Yeah, I think it comes down to more than anything, and we've talked about this, the culture they've established. Like, I will tell you that Joe Gibbs used to say this all the time when I first walked in the league, and he used it the whole time he coached during the course of his tenure at Washington. Great players, right? Great talent makes plays in the first 3 quarters. Character men win games in the 4th quarter.
Wow, that's a great line.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's 100% true. And if you're not willing to look at others on your team as more important than yourself and be able to sacrifice for those guys, then you're ultimately never going to be a championship organization or a championship team. So for, Antonio Brown, I would look at him, and I don't know Antonio. I mean, I know him, but I've interviewed him and I've talked to him, but I don't know him. But he just strikes me as a guy that can lose a game and be completely satisfied as long as he's got 10 catches for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns.
100% accurate.
Yeah, box
That's
score
your
guy.
kind of guy, wide receiver, right?
No, okay,
let me add this.
I played with some great wide. Rod Smith is one of the greatest team guys. I watched him get so excited, more excited about throwing a block than I've seen him be excited about scoring a touchdown. He's one of the greatest teammates and one of the greatest team guys I've ever been around. So it's not. Although we think it's endemic of the position in general, there's a lot of guys who are willing to do the dirty work. I just called a game in Atlanta where Julio Jones comes screaming in, gets a penalty for unnecessary roughness on a crackback block that would make any offensive lineman or defensive player proud. So there are guys that will do the dirty work.
So, Doug, I ask you this question first. Do you think Mike Tomlin is the guy in position to fix this?
He has to. There's no choice. He cannot survive as head coach on this current path, right? They are breaking apart. But look, today's New Year's Day, and everybody makes resolutions, and this happens in marriage, this happens at work, and it happens in sports franchises. Because, like, one of the things that we have avoided that I think, Jason, you got into a little bit is, like, look, Ben Roethlisberger is part of the issue.
Sure.
He said things that go against what Mike Tomlin has said in the past. Like, these dudes all need to get in a room, get a couple cups of coffee, and hug it out.
But the problem with keeping Brown is that kind of attitude, entitlement, ego can rub off on some of your young stars, like a Juju Smith, who, by the way, is on a rise to stardom. You don't want that in your locker room, Greg. You've got to listen.
But he's also killing it with Brown. Like, some of that
15
helps
TDs,
him.
I got it. He's amazing.
No. I'm talking about Juju Smith-Schuster. He still benefits from having Antonio Brown.
But at the same time, there are teams that employ a capologist who their full job, 365 days a year, figure out a way to trade him. Remember Brock Osweiler? He was untradeable because of that contract. Cleveland Browns traded him into cap space, essentially turned that into a second-round pick in Nick Chubb. Like, you can do smart things. I think they'll be able to figure a way out of Antonio Brown.
So for me, this is where I have an issue with the whole, this is Mike Tomlin's issue. Because once your owner reaches out to a player, now it's out of my hands. Now I feel like I can back up if I'm Mike Tomlin and say, look, the owner's now reaching out to you. You need to now address that. I can't address this. This is beyond me now. And when I look at Mike Tomlin, I'm starting to really see and identify some of the problems that he has to deal with that we haven't really focused on.
Well, that's really what you're getting to, a really smart point, which we don't talk enough about on this show, on any shows, which is owners do own, right? You can sit there and you could be Mike Tomlin saying, hey, we should move on from Antonio Brown, but then Antonio Brown goes over your head and goes to the owner and gets a huge contract that's untradeable. That happens in sports. You guys know it better than anybody else.
Right.
We can sit here and criticize Mike Tomlin for not putting the culture in place, but sometimes your hands are tied when you're a head coach. Look, I also think that Roethlisberger, look, I texted him and I called him and I couldn't get a hold of him. Get in your car, drive to his house, and talk it out. He's your best player. That's how relationships sometimes work. So you're not wrong, but going above the coach's head, that tells you a ton about how Antonio Brown's contract got worked out and about why we're seeing a fissure within that locker room.
Alls I'll say when it comes to Mike Tomlin is, you get this a lot, and you've been there in the locker room, where a coach will preach. He'll preach a organizational tenet, if you will. And he'll say, hey, this is the way we do it, the Broncos or the Redskins or wherever you play. This is our way of doing things, and they say, we're going to be held to a higher standard, and this is the way we go about things, and this is, how we operate as an organization. And they all preach that stuff, and they preach it, and it's all about, sacrificing for one another and playing hard and all this stuff, and we're not going to have bad guys on our team and da-da-da, until the most talented guy in the league, who happens to be a bad guy, becomes available, and then we sign him on our team. Right? And then everything that you just told me for the last 4 years you have no more credibility within your locker room. So for Mike Tomlin, this is a credibility issue that ultimately is going to fall on your shoulders. So you're going to either have to fix it or understand you're going to be fired for it. That's what it comes down to. And so he may not be able to fix it. Like, he may have had people go over his head. But, if I'm him, I'm saying, listen, here's why I've screwed up, guys. Yep. Let me be honest with you. Here's where I've screwed up. I've allowed Big Ben, I've allowed you to call people out in the media. That's baloney. Offensive line, you called out a guy that you may not like, in Le'Veon Bell, but you called him out in the media for holding out. It's unacceptable. I've let Antonio Brown miss practice, miss meetings, miss this, miss that, and I haven't held him accountable. That ends today. That will no longer be the case. And then you know what you have to do? You have to actually stand by your word.
Mark, I try that with my kids all the time. Yeah. It never works. Once you open
the door, you always back out of it is the problem.
But listen, New Year's Day is the perfect day, though, to set resolutions and then set in place a plan.
It is, guys. We'll get more into it.